Yesterday, the number two at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Joe Kent, resigned over the administration's handling of the Iran war. In it, he specifically claimed that there was no imminent threat and there was no justification for the United States to go into this war. Today on Capitol Hill, it just happened to turn out, I'm sure it was terrible timing from the director of the National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, but she got into the hot seat and they did not waste any time at all in asking her, was there an imminent threat?
Was it the intelligence community's assessment that nevertheless, despite this obliteration, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
It is not the intelligence community's responsibility to determine what is and is not an imminent threat.
Okay.
That is up to the president
here's the problem.
based on a volume
no,
of
it is
information
precisely
that he receives.
It is precisely your responsibility to determine what constitutes a threat to the United States. This is the Worldwide Threats hearing, where, as you noted in your opening testimony, quote, you represent the IC's assessment of threats. You are here to represent the IC's assessment of threats. That's a quote from your own opening statement. And so my question is, as you're here to present the IC's assessment of threats, was it the assessment of the intelligence community that, as the White House claimed on March 1st, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
Once again, Senator, the intelligence community has provided the inputs that make up this annual threat assessment.
You won't answer the question.
It is the nature of the imminent threat that the president has to make that determination based on a collection and volume
You're here
of
to be
information and
timely.
intelligence that he is provided with.
You're here to be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations.
Exactly what I'm doing.
Ouch, that was painful to watch. And we are grateful today to have with us John Mearsheimer, international relations theorist. I can't get those words out of my mouth. Professor of political science at the University of Chicago and big-time friend of the show. John, welcome back. But how do you react to that? Her answering the question, was there a threat, like President Trump claims, an imminent threat that we had to go to war with Iran? What do you say?
It's very simple, Danny. She can't tell the truth. She knows that Iran was not an imminent threat. The intelligence community fully understands that. We all understand that. But she works for President Trump. She's not independent at all. And she said what was politically correct.
Well, that's pretty cut and dried. But man, we're left with trying to pick up the pieces here because I mean the implications of that are pretty amazing and troubling for the American people. I mean, I think you and I have talked in the past that I mean the guardrails that used to be in the Constitution between the separation of powers between the legislative and the administrative branch, the executive branch. And then even in the War Powers Resolution itself, which was sped, here's the very narrow, limited grounds that the chief executive can use to take the United States to war. Those are certainly out the window. But then the other thing is that, all right, well, just common sense. We're not going to go to war unless there's a need to, that our defense is at threat. And yet none of those things have happened here. So what does that tell you? Just kind of looking at this from the 30,000 foot level, what does that tell you about the state of play of the American government right now in our very form of government, if I can?
Well, as far as checks and balances are concerned, they're largely irrelevant at this point in time. Congress is not a serious institution, and it has no ability to block President Trump when it comes to foreign policy. He can act like a dictator or a king or an emperor. He's free to do pretty much anything he wants. I think what's very interesting about this whole debate about whether there was an imminent threat and therefore whether we were justified in going to war against Iran implies that we were in the driver's seat and that we were the ones who decided to go to war. And that's not what happened here. The Israelis and the Israel lobby here in the United States led us into this war. And we really did not have much choice. We went along with the Israelis. They were in the driver's seat. We weren't in the driver's seat. I'm quite certain that President Trump understood that Iran was not an imminent threat to the United States. You can't make that case. There's just no evidence to support it. I would make the argument it wasn't even an imminent threat to Israel, but Israel wanted to go to war against the United States. As Bibi Netanyahu has made clear, he's been working for the past 40 years to drag us into a war against Iran, and he finally succeeded.
Yeah, and that by itself is very troubling. And in fact, that's you don't even hardly have to speculate from what you just said there. From President Trump's own mouth, he said that he based his decision to strike based on not Tulsi Gabbard, not the CIA director, not the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, not the CENTCOM commander, but Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. By his own account, that's who he listened to. And as some may know, they have some association and affinity for Israel. So we'll just leave it at that. But that is problematic, because if there's no guardrails and it's literally that the president of the United States, whether it's Trump or whoever may follow him into the future, I mean, that's a pretty dangerous place for us to basically be a one-man show that has at his beck and call the use of the armed forces. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we had this form of government back when we formed it 250 years ago anyway.
Well, there are two major problems here. In fact, there are two profound problems here. One is the one that you just identified, which is the Constitution doesn't work anymore when it comes to the execution of foreign policy. But the second problem is that we basically have a situation where a foreign government can lead us into wars that are not in the American national interest. It's really quite remarkable what's going on here. If you look at President Trump and the decision-making process that took place here, it's quite clear that he explicitly said that he would rely on what Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff told him about the state of the negotiations. Well, we just learned from an article in The Guardian yesterday that a man named Jonathan Powell, who is the national security advisor in Britain. I want to emphasize that. He's the national security advisor in Britain, and he was present at the U.S. Iranian negotiations right before the war started on February 28th. And he said not only did he think that a deal was possible, but he said that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were effectively Israeli agents or Israeli assets. Just think about that. Israeli assets. These are the two principal advisors to President Trump dealing with the question of whether or not we should go to war with Iran. And of course, you have other people like Senator Lindsey Graham, who by his own admission is coaching Prime Minister Netanyahu on how he can coax President Trump into going to war against Iran. Just think about that. This is hard to believe. The United States is supposed to be a sovereign country. It's one of the most powerful states in the history of the world. It's clearly the most powerful state on the planet today. And here we have a situation where a foreign country, Israel, and its allies here in the United States are able to lead us into a war that by almost all accounts is going to end up in a disastrous ending.
Well, it certainly is. Gary, we're able to pull up that Lindsey Graham that I had was looking for earlier. If we have this, I want to show you, because you can't get to if just the president is wanting to do that. It just his whether his his buddy or his son-in-law are wanting to do something. That's one important capacity. But without the active benefit of the U.S. media, you're not going to be able to get that. In his resignation letter, Joe Kent yesterday said that there was no imminent threat. We mentioned that, but he also said in there that the active participation of the mainstream media helped to promote this. I'm going to show you one clip here from Lindsey Graham last night to where he is going overboard, and with the assistance of Sean Hannity, to make the case that President Trump had to go.
If you believe the Ayatollah would use a nuclear weapon, if he had it, you're right. To those who have their heads in the sand, don't believe that, you're wrong. To my friend Joe Kent, who's a decorated war veteran who lost his wife in Syria, what are you doing? You're giving aid and comfort to a lie. There was an imminent threat. How much more imminent could you be within 2 weeks having enough material to make 10 bombs? How close could you come? Not much.
Now, as we've said many times, we had on our show in July of last year, Ted Postal tell everybody that there was 400 and something kilograms of reprocessed material and they could make 10 bombs. So this idea that we discovered that from in the negotiations is complete lie, total 100% lie. But now that it's being characterized as a discovery that, oh my God, they were a week or two away from a bomb, and there's no truth to that whatsoever. And yet there they are saying this on television. I mean, that seems to feed into the problem you were just describing.
Yeah, well, you can't trust anything that Lindsey Graham says. You can't trust anything that President Trump says. And going back to our earlier discussion about Tulsi Gabbard, you can't trust anything she says as well. It's a sad state of events here in the United States. You can't trust hardly anybody who's in a position of authority.
And I'll just ask the obvious question, but how can a country, how can a government continue to function effectively and not run off the ledge off a cliff if you can't believe anything that anybody's saying out in public or on television?
It can't run effectively. And if you want any evidence of that, all you have to do is look at what's happening in Iran. And if you have any doubts about that, you can look at what happened in Afghanistan before that. And if you still have doubts, you can go back and look at what happened in Iraq. The United States has the Midas touch in reverse. And this is one of the principal reasons as to why that's the case.
Ouch, the Midas touch in reverse. That's a painful moniker there. But let's look at some of the other, I guess we got to go this too. Let's take a look at where we are now. All right, we're in trouble. We lied ourselves into this, and now President Trump is desperately trying to find a way out, because unlike all these other things we got into, which were relatively easy to play around with and to muddle around with, and then whenever at a time of our choosing we could just walk away, we can't do that this time, because we have now handed leverage to the Iranian side with the Strait of Hormuz and all the oil that has to flow through that. Now then, they have the power to keep it closed unless we do something that they like, and we don't like that. So let's take a look now at where we are here. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you here something from another of the big truth tellers in American media today, John Bolton.
In addition to the supreme leader, hundreds of other top Iranian officials, military and civilian, have been killed. I suspect the number is even greater than that. And extraordinary damage has been done to the Revolutionary Guard, to the besieged militia, to the Quds Force. There's still a long way to go. The autocracy built up over 47 years in Iran is a massive weapon of repression of its own people and threat to its neighbors. So we're just at the beginning of the third week of this. There's a long way to go. I think we need to understand that. But I do think the combined U.S.-Israeli operation is having one success after another.
One success after another. And what he's talking about there is this assassination program that Israel had, which they escalated up a little bit today publicly with the Israeli Defense Minister Katz, who's saying we have authorized the IDF to eliminate any Iranian official at all, whether it's religious, government, military, scientists, whatever, anything that they want has this once a targeting circle, as he's called it, has been closed on them without the need for additional approval. So it sounds to me like they're going to try and just assassinate their way out of this war. Will it work?
No, I think the Iranians have a deep bench, and people who are assassinated will be replaced by competent individuals. And in some cases, I believe those individuals will be more effective than the person who they are replacing, who was assassinated. I think the idea that Israel is going to win this war with a decapitation strategy is delusional. It's not going to happen. But the key point you want to remember is that John Bolton said that we're just at the start of what is going to be a long war. And in a long war, we are in deep trouble. All you have to do is look at all the economic forecasts. Given the existing situation, and people are deeply worried about where we are heading. It's not only because oil and gas prices are going up, that's going to cause inflation, and that's going to have all sorts of political and social consequences, but it's also because of what's happening with fertilizer. Not many people talk about this, but 1/3 of the world's fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz, and we are already beginning to feel the consequences of that shutdown. It's going to have a significant increase on food prices. So again, you want to think about just projecting this war going on for more and more time, for more and more months, and ask yourself, what are going to be the economic consequences given the state of play today? But you don't want to put too much stock in the state of play today, because it looks like events are beginning to unfold that are going to make this economic situation even worse. And that is that today, the Israelis attacked the South Pars natural gas field in Iran. This is the largest natural gas field in the world. It matters enormously for the Iranians. And the Iranians have said that in response, they're going to hit oil installations in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. You just want to think about that. We are now going up the escalation ladder where both sides are hitting the oil and gas infrastructure in each country. This is just going to drive the price of oil and gas up further and cause more economic damage to the international economy. And we could tell all sorts of other stories about how you go further up the escalation ladder and you have even greater trouble. So in terms of the economic consequences of where we are and where we appear to be heading, the United States is in real trouble. And there's going to be very powerful pressure on President Trump to put an end to this war. Now, he might not do that, but it's important to understand that if he doesn't put an end to this war and he can't get the Iranians to agree to put an end to the war, we may end up tanking the international economy.
Yeah, there was, in fact, CNBC this morning, one of their analysts said that the price, and I think it's at $97 at the moment, still hovering right around 100. That's because of a number of, if you call it artificial constraints or policy actions, have kept it from going any more from the 67 where it started up to 97 right now. But that those have a short time expense on them, and if it's not open by the end of the month, they said so about 2 weeks from now, it could be somewhere between 120 and 150, and still headed north if the fundamentals aren't affected. And as you said, it's more than even the oil; it's also gas, and it's also the urea and other things that are needed for agriculture. So there's a real time constraint going on here. And I just want to, I guess, put a cap on the part about the assassination campaign, whether that could work. If Israel thinks it will, we'll just keep accelerating the number of people we kill. To your point, here's what Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said when asked about that very process.
I do not know why the Americans and the Israelis still have not understood this point. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a strong political structure with established political, economic, and social institutions. The presence or absence of a single individual does not affect this structure. Of course, individuals are influential, and each person plays their role, some better, some worse, some less. But what matters is that the political system in Iran is a very solid structure. We have not had anyone more important than the leader himself, and even the leader was martyred. Yet the system continued to work and immediately provided a replacement. If anyone else is martyred, it will be the same. If the foreign minister were ever to be martyred, there would ultimately be someone else to take the position.
So even he says, I mean, pretty calmly there, he knows he's definitely got to be under the target list. President Pezeshkian got to be under the target list, and so many other people too. But he seems to be pretty confident that the system itself, you can't kill the system in a country of 93 million people. Is his confidence well placed, or is it poorly placed?
It's well placed. But the other thing, Danny, that you want to understand is that the Iranians prepared for this war. The Iranians are fully aware that the Israelis have long engaged in decapitation strategies. You remember the June war of last year, the 12-day war, June 2025. It opened up with a decapitation strategy. This war opened up with a decapitation strategy regarding Hamas, regarding Hezbollah, regarding all of Israel's enemies. The Israelis invariably engage in decapitation, but it doesn't work. And it certainly is not going to work against the state as big and as well established as Iran that has prepared for this eventuality. So it's hard to disagree with the foreign minister. And this is why, by the way, John Bolton said that this war is going to go on for a long time. John Bolton, if you listen carefully, is actually telling you that the decapitation strategy is not going to produce a quick and decisive victory. Danny, let me make one other point. As a result of the attack of the South Pars natural gas field in Iran this morning, gas was up around $108 a barrel. It wasn't at 97 or even 100. And I bet the price of a barrel is going to go up much further when the Iranians retaliate against what happened this morning with regard to the South Pars field, and they hit Saudi Arabia, and they hit Kuwait, and they hit not Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, the oil fields or the oil facilities and gas facilities in those countries. It'll cause the price of a barrel to spike even higher. And many people were saying before today that $100 per barrel price level is going to do enormous damage to the international economy over time. We had to get it down. But what's happening here is the price of a barrel, if anything, appears to be going up. I would add one other thing to that you want to keep your eye on. President Trump has told the Israelis not to strike the petroleum facilities in Iran because President Trump feared that we would go up the escalation ladder and that would cause the price of a barrel of oil to escalate. But it was the Israelis who attacked the South Pars oil field, gas field this morning, not the Americans. And I would not be surprised if the Americans are furious with the Israelis for doing that.
Now, the question is, are we going to do anything about it? Somebody else who was infuriated about it was Qatar, because they called the Israeli strikes of facilities linked to the South Pars field an extension of Qatar's North Field, a dangerous and irresponsible step amid the current military escalation, as you referred to, in the region. Targeting energy infrastructure constitutes a threat to global energy security as well as to the people. So certainly they know that they're in the crosshairs when they made that comment. The question is, I got to ask you, there are some analysts I've seen in the United States that say this is probably Israel's attempt to draw the GCC in, knowing that Iran probably would make good on their threat to hit others if the Pars field were hit. So they did that on purpose to see if once Iran does its counterstrikes, that will then draw the GCC in together with Israel, and then together would be unified force all against Iran, i.e. they would blame Iran for the war. Do you think that will work?
I don't understand this argument. The GCC has been in this one from the beginning. First of all, there's all sorts of evidence that countries in the GCC, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, encouraged the United States and Israel to go to war against Iran. Furthermore, once the war started, the GCC countries have been encouraging the United States and Israel to whack Iran really hard and finish the job. So it just seems to me that they're involved from the get-go. To take it a step further, there are all sorts of military installations located in these GCC countries that the United States uses to wage this war. And you don't see these GCC countries telling the United States that they can't use the military installations located on their territory to fight the war. So, in my opinion, the GCC and the Israelis and the Americans have effectively been in bed together from the get-go. Now, you might say to yourself, well, if these GCC countries become seriously or overtly involved, that the military capability that they bring to the table will shift the balance decisively in favor of the United States and Israel. This is a laughable argument. What kind of military assets do these countries have
Right.
to bring to the fight, right? I just don't understand. These countries are paying a god-awful price, and they're probably going to pay a much worse price before all is said and done for allying themselves with the United States and Israel and encouraging the United States and Israel to attack Iran, and then cooperating with the United States and Israel as those two countries wage this war against Iran.
And in terms of escalation, you've mentioned that a couple of times. That was also in the Qatari statement there. They don't want to see it expand. Of course, apparently, if behind the scenes they were saying, we want you guys, America and Israel, to schwack Iran, they certainly now don't want to have to pay any price for that. And in that same interview with Abbas Araghchi, he addressed the issue of escalation and said, you need to make sure you put that responsibility in the right place.
We did not expand the war. The war is inherently expansive. This is a point we had already warned our friends in the region about for a very simple reason. When the United States attacks us, our armed forces, our missiles, and our drones cannot reach U.S. territory. Therefore, we are inevitably compelled to respond by striking U.S. military bases in the region and attacking U.S. military assets in the region. Unfortunately, these assets are spread across the entire region and regrettably are located on the territory of our friendly countries. This is the nature of this war. When the United States attacks us, coming from 10,000 miles away to strike here, it is only natural that we must respond.
I mean, really, he just basically said what you just did there too. That's why he's doing this, because they don't want to expand it. And in fact, evidence suggests with their negotiations and diplomacy, and I think you and I talked about this before the war even happened. I mean, they were going through that last round of diplomatic maneuvering with the United States after having already been attacked once in 2025 in the midst of it. So I don't think anybody in Iran was surprised by anything that happened here. But the question is, where can we go now? Is there any room for any diplomacy at all? Or is this going to be very similar to how the Russia-Ukraine is? It's going to be decided on the battlefield.
I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, what you're really asking me is, do we have an off-ramp here? Is there some way we can shut this war down? I don't see how you can do it. I've talked to a number of my friends about this, and I've asked myself this question. And I think the best answer my friends can come up with is that we declare victory and get out. And you hear a number of people who are close to the administration and sympathetic to the administration who think it's time to get out, make that same argument. But the problem with that argument is you can declare victory, but people can see with their very own eyes that this is not a victory. It's, in fact, a humiliating defeat. And furthermore, to really put an end to this, you have to get the Iranians to agree to quit. And to get the Iranians to agree to quit, you have to make concessions to them. And I don't see how President Trump can make any meaningful concessions to the Iranians and get away with it politically here in the United States, or certainly with regard to Israel.
Well, and to your point here, this is what Abbas Araghchi has said on this topic, and it was yesterday. We don't believe in any ceasefires. We believe in an end to the war, and an end to the war on all fronts. He emphasized that Iran is ready to listen to mediators' proposals, but to your point, they must meet Iran's conditions. What difficulties is the Iranian side going to have in sticking with that position? Because it certainly seems to me that the United States and Israel still have a lot more firepower, even with diminished stockpiles. They can still bring a lot of pain to the Iranian side. Do you think that Iran can still endure that pain and not change their negotiating position?
Well, before I answer that question, let me just note to you that Iran can go up the escalation ladder as well as we can. And the question you have to ask yourself is, can we handle the pain that will come with them taking us up the escalation ladder?
Fascinating.
You just want to remember they have cards to play here, right? They are, by cutting off 1/3 of the world's fertilizer, doing significant damage to food production around the world and greatly enhancing inflation. And in terms of oil and gas, we're having a devil of a time keeping it around $100 a barrel. And they can do much to raise that price. You want to remember the Red Sea is still open. Gas is coming. The Strait of Hormuz is shut down, except for Iranian ships going through the strait. But the Red Sea is open. And you want to remember that 12% of the world's oil and gas comes through the Red Sea. Well, it would not be very difficult for the Houthis and the Iranians working together to shut down the Red Sea. And that would have devastating consequences on the world economy. To take it a step further, there are these desalination plants inside of the various GCC countries, the Gulf states. Those countries are heavily dependent on desalination plants to provide fresh water. I think in Kuwait, 90% of the water is from desalination plants. In Saudi Arabia, I think the number is 70%. And the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, it's 42%. And those desalination plants are big fat targets. And if the Iranians get desperate enough, they'll go after those desalination plants. And you want to understand, when they go after those desalination plants, they're basically going to, I'm choosing my words carefully here now, they're basically going to destroy countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and so forth and so on as functioning societies. They're going to destroy them as functioning societies. So the Iranians, right, have powerful cards to play. And furthermore, the Iranians understand they're facing an existential threat. We don't want to lose sight of that. And if you listen to people like John Bolton and Prime Minister Netanyahu speak, they clearly intend to present Israel with an existential threat. And by the way, President Trump says the same thing on occasion. He talks about effectively wiping Iran off the map. So if you're an Iranian policymaker and you know you're facing an existential threat, and the other side begins to up the ante, you counter escalate, you up the ante, and you understand that you have some very powerful cards to play.
Yeah. So
if I'm playing President Trump's hand, I do not want to go up the escalation ladder, certainly at this point in time. And I want to try and figure out how I can get out of this. But this brings us back to your original question. How do we get out of this? To which I have no answer. And I believe you have no answer unless you can provide one for me now that I can use when I'm asked this question.
Oh, I have an answer. All right. It's the same one that Volodymyr Zelensky had in April of 2022. You accept an ugly deal and you get off the table and you stop the bleeding. Trump can do the same thing here. He can accept an ugly deal, which the Iranian side is offering. But if he says, no, my pride is too much and I can't do it, then he'll have the same thing that Zelensky has, and he'll just have a long period of even more, all the things you just mentioned. Every one of those cards could be played. And the price goes higher every time you don't take this ugly deal. It gets uglier. But I don't expect that to happen. But that's what could happen here. But let me show you what President Trump is trying to do instead. He's trying to say, hey, I'm looking for not a diplomatic card to get out. I'm looking for a military card that can give me an advantage to go up. And he has in his mind, and I don't know who's advising him, that, you know what, let's bring in some foreign navies and open up the Strait of Hormuz and just get that going on here. And in fact, this morning he tweeted this out, that U.S. allies need to get a grip, step up and help open that strait. I'm tired of begging other stuff. Let's get it done. To which Keir Starmer said this.
While taking the necessary action to defend ourselves and our allies, we will not be drawn into the wider war. We will keep working towards a swift resolution that brings security and stability back to the region and stops the Iranian threat to its neighbors.
So you can just make blah, 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 everything he said after. We will not get involved in the war because it doesn't even matter after that. And obviously everybody else, and I mean everybody else, said the same thing afterwards. What does this tell you about what other countries recognize, and I'm talking our allies here, about what Trump should do?
Well, everybody recognizes that you can't blow through the straits with naval power alone. It's just not going to work. The United States has the most powerful Navy in the world by far, as you and I both know. And the U.S. Navy has no interest in trying to force its way through the Strait of Hormuz. This reminds me a lot of Gallipoli and the attack on the Dardanelles by the British in 1915. Winston Churchill, of course, was the principal architect of that campaign. And what he thought the British Navy could do was blow through the Dardanelles with naval power alone. And the Dardanelles is a large strait, not altogether unlike the Strait of Hormuz. And a number of people told Churchill this was not doable. And the main reason was mines. There were lots of mines that had been laid by the Turks in the Dardanelles. And anyway, the British Navy tried to blow its way through, and ships started getting blown up, and it had to back off. What the British then did was they landed ground forces at Gallipoli, and they eventually suffered a catastrophic defeat. The casualty level was about 250,000. Right, there's a good picture of the Dardanelles, exactly. And you see the British tried to go straight through there with a navy, and then they would get into a large body of water that would bring them to Constantinople, and then they could go into the Black Sea. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't get through the strait. They couldn't get through the Dardanelles. So they landed at Gallipoli down there at the bottom on the left-hand side. Right there. That's where they landed. That was Gallipoli. And they were pinned down there for over a year, suffered 250,000 casualties. This is what will happen to us if we land at Kharg Island, right?
And if I could just tell you, that is one tiny part of this, and let's pull back here to look at the requirement here is profoundly larger than that. It's not just right here. That's through the Dardanelles was a relatively small place. You'd have to clear all of this. And I don't even think that's militarily possible. I think it's beyond the capability of the Western world.
Yeah. And Danny, can you show on the map where Kharg Island is? It's on the eastern side of the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah. How do you get to Kharg Island? Right. If you can't blow your way through the Strait of Hormuz, you have to launch an amphibious operation from Saudi Arabia, which is to the west of Kharg Island. Good luck on that one, right? So you'll end up with a Gallipoli too. This is just one of those situations for anybody who studied military history and understands just how lethal mines are. You cannot underestimate how lethal mines are. And in this day and age, you have cruise missiles as well that can hit large ships, large naval ships and tankers, which was not the case in 1915 in the Dardanelles. The Turks didn't have cruise missiles. They just relied on mines. Well, the Iranians are going to rely on, drones, mines, cruise missiles, on and on. It'll be a nightmare getting through there. And by the way, let's assume that you break through the Strait of Hormuz and you're into the Persian Gulf. You still present yourself as a big fat target to the Iranian forces that are right there on the shore. You don't want to go in the Persian Gulf. And by the way, Danny, this is why we are now deploying our Navy far away from the Persian Gulf. We don't want to get too close.
Right.
Forget going through the Strait of Hormuz. We don't even want to get close
to it. Right.
I
You know,
wanna
it's
see them
interesting.
bring an aircraft carrier up there, right?
Yeah, any of them.
Yeah,
Less, much less the USS Tripoli, which is headed that direction. But I doubt very seriously that anybody has any fantasies about sending that thing through the gauntlet. But you know what's interesting is that in a weird sort of way, you just laid out just the historical analysis of what happened with Gallipoli and the Dardanelles and all that, and showed how that's like a much smaller problem that was almost impossible to solve back then, when the defenders had even less capability than the Iranians have right now. And all of our allies have said, no, we're not going to do it. And yet a guy named Ito Aharani, who was the former consul general for the Israelis in New York, mocked everybody who's not doing this. Like, what is wrong with you people? Get on board.
I think the Europeans are making a terrible mistake, because Iran is a problem for the entire Western civilization. It has been a problem since 1979. It's a sworn enemy of Western values. And so not to see that is just a rare case of diplomatic blindness and negligence, if you ask me. They have to be actively involved.
You know, let me just start with this premise there. Is Iran really the sworn enemy of Western values?
No, the greatest threat to Western values on the planet at this point in time is Israel, not Iran. You could substitute the word Israel for Iran, and you'd be much closer to the truth than what that gentleman just said. You want to understand, Danny, as we've talked about on this show before, that Israel is an apartheid state which has been executing a genocide in Gaza. Is there anything that's more antithetical to Western values than to be an apartheid state, number one, and number two, to execute a genocide? You might not like the regime in Iran. I certainly don't, but it's not an apartheid regime. And furthermore, there is zero evidence that the Iranians have ever even attempted have attempted, much less committed genocide. And if you look at what countries running around the Middle East attacking almost every one of its neighbors, it's not Iran. If you go back to 1945 and you ramp forward, I cannot find a single instance of where Iran attacked one of its neighbors. With regard to Israel, it's a completely different story. So this idea that Israel is the eternal victim and that it's a Western liberal democracy and represents American values is laughable. That story is told all the time by propagandists. It's a story that the Israel lobby points out.
And you know, let me ask a separate question here, because let's just, I guess for the sake of argument, let's say that he had that fellow there had some points, and that there was a threat, and that they were going to come after him, whatever. There's a difference between, I don't like these guys and I want to get rid of them, and then there's I'll call it the second lieutenant level of analysis between ways and means. This is what I want to accomplish. Here's the resources I have, and oh snap, there aren't enough. I can't do it because the other side, their enemy capabilities and their the terrain, the geography, all that stuff, we can't get there from here. So it seems like it used to be a second lieutenant level stuff to say, all right, well, I'd like to do that, but we simply can't. So we're going to have to figure something else out. Instead of, it seems to me, tell me what you think, is that our elite across the board in the West just says, I want this, and I'm not going to worry about analysis. We'll just go get it and just send the military in without having done this analysis. I mean, that seems self-destructive, if anything else.
I agree with you 100%. As I've said many times, including on this show, it's very clear to me that the American foreign policy establishment is filled with people who have very little understanding of the military instrument. And most importantly, they don't have a healthy appreciation of the limits of military power. Um, you really have to think long and hard when you go to war about what your goals are. And you have to be very clear as to what exactly they are. And then you have to take a look at what kind of capabilities you have and whether or not those capabilities are sufficient for achieving those goals. And you also just have to understand that there are real limits to what military force can do. I often say to people that I think one of the advantages of having served in the American military for 10 years, and I'm talking about myself here, is that I really came to understand what a blunt instrument the American military is. And of course, this is true of all militaries, but the American military is a blunt instrument, and there are real limits to what you can do with it. And you just have to understand that. For example, if you're going to go into a country and try to do nation building, as we did in Vietnam with the American Army, you're asking for serious trouble. The American Army is not configured to do nation building, which is one of the most difficult tasks on the planet. If you have a powerful Air Force and you think you can just simply go in and decapitate and that's going to produce some sort of magical outcome, you haven't studied military history. You don't understand what the limits of a decapitation strategy are. And the same thing applies to a punishment strategy where you murder huge numbers of civilians. We've tried this on numerous occasions and it doesn't work. There are just real limits to what you can do with military power. And again, I think one of the problems is that huge chunks of the American national security establishment, they don't have a good sense of just what the limits are and how you want to think strategically about employing the military that you have at your disposal.
Well, it's impossible to argue with you. I was going to say hard, but it's impossible. Just given what we've embarked upon and just a cursory level of the examination of the fundamentals that you just got through doing here. It's also not limited to the United States, as it turns out.
Yeah.
There's one last thing it's related to all this. It's also connected to Europe. I just found this really puzzling and curious. So President Trump, to try and keep the price of oil down below $100, has said, all right, I'm going to have a temporary release on the sanctions on Russia. Russia now can sell oil, whatever these constraints allegedly are. And that has been successful short term to keep it even at $100 a barrel. But the European Union, not very excited about that. So Kaja Kallas says, hey, you know what? We're going to go after Russian tankers.
Following the U.S. decision to ease sanctions on Russian oil, Europe will maintain sanctions and continue to move away from Russian fossil fuels. If we want this war to end, Moscow must have less money for the war, not more. Dialing up pressure on Russia's shadow fleet is one of the best tools we have. I commend France, Belgium and also Sweden for boarding and seizing falsely flagged tankers. It is time for the gloves to come off on Russia's shadow fleet.
It's time for the gloves to come off. That's what you want to do right now. I mean, what do you say to that? Maybe I'm off my rocker here.
No, I want to step back and reinforce your point. What President Trump is trying to do is he's trying to do everything possible to keep the price of a barrel of oil under $100. And make $100 the ceiling. And if you march up to that ceiling, to march back down if you can. Okay. And to achieve that end, he's done two things. One is he's basically taken the sanctions off of Russian oil and gas. And this, of course, is what has Ms. Kallas so upset. But the reason he did that is he wants to get as much Russian oil into the global oil market so as to keep the price of oil down. The second thing he's done, which in a funny way is even more amazing, is he is allowing the Iranians to send their oil through the Persian Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz, and to the purchasers in China, India, and assorted other countries. So the flow of oil out of Iran has not been cut off. This is truly remarkable. And the question is why? And the answer is President Trump not only wants all that Russian oil out in the global market, he wants the Iranian oil out in the global market as well. This all goes to show you what a precarious position we're in. And it gets back to my earlier discussion of how the Iranians can take certain steps, right, to cut off the flow of oil out of the Red Sea, for example, to really cause us enormous problems. And by the way, even with all of that Russian oil and that Iranian oil flowing into the global market, President Trump is still having a devil of a time creating a future where inflation doesn't eat away at the American economy and cause him and the Republicans huge problems in the November elections. So you really get a sense of just how much trouble we're in. And then you hear people like Kaya Kallas talking about, right, trying to prevent the flow of Russian oil into global markets. And you just sort of scratch your head and say, what planet is she living on here? Do you know what will happen if the global economy crashes? This is, absolutely something that we want to go to great lengths to avoid.
Yeah, but they're just. I mean, if there's not a second lieutenant level of military analysis in the United States, there doesn't seem to be an intern level of understanding in the diplomatic field in Europe. Not a good combination for what we have right now. Listen, last question I've got for you. This is Trump is scrambling to try to find something to get out of this mess that he's got himself into. And as you said a minute ago, I don't see any obtainable diplomatic off ramps that he can take, that he can politically survive at home. So the fact is, question is, what's he going to do instead? Because he can't just muddle on and do nothing, because pretty soon all these efforts are not going to be successful at keeping $100 as the ceiling. That's going to become the floor pretty quickly. What do you think about the possibility that I've heard some float here that, what the U.S. should do? They should get like a special operations force together, and get a bunch of Delta Force guys or SEAL Team 6, some combination of that, and go and get that enriched uranium. Because then if President Trump can go and seize that, all those stockpile that they have, then we can say, okay, we succeeded. There's not going to be a nuclear weapon because we've got all their stuff. What do you say to that?
Well, I think it's a crazy idea. First of all, if you and I have thought about that possibility, the Iranians have surely thought about that possibility. And that means that they're going to have lots of soldiers around the site or sites where that enriched uranium is located. They're probably going to have some sophisticated air defenses around those sites as well. And that means if we go get them, we try to go get them, they'll meet us. And I think it would take a major league miracle for us to succeed in getting in there, suffering few casualties, and getting out with the enriched uranium. I actually find it hard to believe that President Trump would try that. But let's assume that I'm wrong. Let's assume that he does it. Let's assume that he's as successful as he was at kidnapping President Maduro in Venezuela. The question you have to ask yourself, Danny, is so what? There's no question that the Iranians have a significant nuclear enrichment capability. They can just enrich more uranium. It's like, during the Cold War, when the Soviets exploded their first bomb, we thought about whether we should go in and eliminate their nuclear capability altogether before they developed a large arsenal of deliverable bombs. And we decided not to do it because we came to the conclusion that even if we were able to destroy it once, even twice, the Soviets would eventually develop an arsenal of nuclear weapons. And the same logic applies here with regard to this enriched uranium. You can capture that uranium, you can take it out of Iran, and you can temporarily solve the problem of them having 60% enriched uranium. But it's not a long-term solution because they can easily, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, they can easily enrich more uranium up to 60%. And in fact, what they're likely to do is enrich it up to 90%, which is weapons grade material. Because what's likely to happen as a result of this foolish war is that Iran is likely to get nuclear weapons. I would think that one of the principal lessons the Iranians have learned from this conflict is that they made a major mistake not acquiring a nuclear deterrent. They should have followed in the footsteps of South Korea instead of Colonel Gaddafi.
North Korea.
Yeah. So, I don't know what to say. It's just hard to believe.
Speaking of these kind of high risk operations, I can't help but remember the failed Iranian hostage rescue. 45 years later, we looked at a lot of the mistakes. The Operation Eagle Claw, remember the one that ended in disaster with those helicopters that ended up crashing. Let's see if I got that one here. That's that enduring image right there. Man, I just don't want to see a modern version of that happen here. But that's just, I mean, on top of all the things you just mentioned about how even if you succeeded, all you've done is just kick the can down the road a little bit, and it doesn't solve anything. But man, I think that this is probably what we'd see more than kicking the can down the road is some version of that. I just really hope we don't go down that path.
The other thing, Danny, is you know better than I do, helicopters are remarkably vulnerable aircraft. The idea that you're going to take a fleet of helicopters and land at a specific point inside of Iran, where that enriched nuclear fuel is I think foolish in the extreme.
And I think that part of the my boss over Defense Priorities, Ed King, he has this statement of saying sometimes he fears more than failure, catastrophic success with a dumb idea and it works, like the Venezuela thing. You remember a lot of that imagery that came out of there, and a lot of bombs blowing up and all those things happening at night, and then there was this a whole string of helicopters flying across the horizon. They were backlit by a bunch of burning things that we had attacked or whatever. And I remember thinking immediately the second I saw that, I'm like, nobody is shooting at these helicopters. I don't know if we got all the air defense out or if we had an agreement that they're not going to shoot, because that was the easiest thing in the world to knock down. I worry that President Trump may have also been impressed by that made-for-TV imagery and said, yeah, we did it then. We can do it again, man. It'll work just as good there. I worry about that.
Yeah, this is not going to be a kidnapping operation with no resistance down on the ground. There's going to be massive resistance down on the ground, and I would not want to be in one of those helicopters.
Yeah, definitely not. And I hope nobody has to find out firsthand. It won't work out well for us. Well, listen, really appreciate you. I'm not going to put you back on the hot spot again to ask you, how's this going to end? Because you've already told me you don't have it, and nobody has a good answer for it. But the one question I will ask you at the end here is, how long do you think that this can go on before something has to give? How long can we muddle along with where we're in now on day 18 or 19, I guess?
It's hard for me to imagine it going on much beyond 2 or 3 months, just because of the damage that is likely to be done to the international economy. It would just seem to me that President Trump at some point, maybe 2 or 3 months out, is going to have no choice but to end the war. But who knows for sure? It's just what's so difficult, Danny, is to determine how fast we'll go up the escalation ladder. If we go up the escalation ladder at a rather rapid pace, it could end pretty quickly because the damage that would be done to the international economy would be great. But if things pretty much stabilize in terms of going up the escalation ladder, and neither side does anything terribly provocative, the war could go on probably beyond 3 months, maybe for a really long period of time. But my guess would be, after 3 months, this one will probably come to an end.
Well, that certainly seems reasonable, just out of requirement, and not forget about what anybody wants, even Israel at that point, because there could become a point where the pressure is so great on everybody else that even Israel will be told to shut up and sit down. We'll see how that works out. In fact, we'll see. I'm wondering what we may discover like 24 hours from now if Iran makes good on its threat and starts hitting a lot of these oil facilities. The whole conversation could be changed tomorrow, but
yeah,
we'll just have to wait and see.
I think that's right, Danny. And that gets back to my point that if that happens, let's see what happens to oil prices, the cost of a barrel, right?
Yep, could go way up. Well, listen, we really appreciate you coming on here. And just a reminder, everybody, Mearsheimer.substack.com is where you can find all that you need to find about John. He puts out stuff very frequently. You definitely want to keep up to that with this rapidly changing situation. Always keep up with John there. And we will appreciate you coming on and look forward to seeing you next time.
Excuse me, Danny. I look forward to coming back. And thanks for having me.
Always my pleasure. And we thank you guys too. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't, if you're new to our channel here. Also, to let you know, folks, we got any kind of way you want to get information, we got it here. We're on podcast. You can see there, Apple Podcast, Spotify. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We're also on the Substack here. It's danieldavisdeepdive.substack.com. You've got us there. Of course, you got us right here. We're on Instagram. Basically, any way you have your information, we've got it here for you. Be sure and share this with folks, because I'm telling you, we are telling you the unintimidated and uncompromised truth, something you just hardly ever get on mainstream media anymore, and it's so rare. Make sure you share this with your friends. Don't keep it all to yourself. Thank you very much, folks, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.